The Time Agency. Sample Story 1. Faded Echoes of a Lost Dreamscape. Imagine, if you will, a world that blends technicolor and dull grey. Swelling patterns of energy that look like mist or clouds in the background. A world where odd creatures occupy a dreamlike landscape. But a dreamlike landscape when the dream is ending. This is a realm of thought, a metaphysical realm, where a shared universal unconscious for humanity, an individual human aspiration reach, and where the thoughts of man take shape in archetypical forms, reflecting current beliefs and ideals. Here, symbols move as if alive, or dot a landscape that is shifting and gradually breaking apart, seemingly turning to dust and dissipating, with energy being finally pulled into the sky, towards a large black void. Here, dreams die and ideals crumble. It is a fading, collapsing world, a last gasp of a dying dream. It is in this strange landscape that our story begins. And our story begins with the arrival, in this landscape, of a sphere. The sphere appears in a darkened world with a grey landscape. Some flashes of colour remain in the sky, buried beneath what appear to be clouds made of light, not vapour. The arrival. The world they had come to was not a world at all. It was the memory of one. A grey expanse stretching towards horizons that shifted and blurred like watercolours left in the rain. Above, the sky hung low and heavy, dense with something that was not typical clouds, but something else. Clouds of light, perhaps, or the faint breath of dying concepts. Colour bleeding through in thinning stretches of aurora, desperate threads standing in firm defiance before succumbing to their inevitable fate and joining the listless grey. The sphere descended, its silver surface shimmering from the darkness into something almost solid, but not quite, then falling back again into something more liminal and ethereal, and moving up, then down, before settling into the landscape's aged air. A door opened, and a ramp lowered, and two figures emerged. The first to emerge was Jill Sherford. Her boots landed on the ground that was not quite ground, and was more the suggestion of earth. More like the shape of a foot might leave in a dream already fading. Behind her, Sky last name followed, his black eyes taking in the vista, with the calm of a man who had witnessed endings before. Both were dressed in black suits with white lapels, white cuffs, and broad white stripe along the bottom, and a red cravat. Jill was a short woman with deep red hair and deep green eyes. Sky was pale-skinned, with black hair and black eyes. They were time agents. They had come here both to witness this world as it collapsed, and to ensure that it collapsed smoothly, that its components fell into the great void in the sky, and that the void did not become clogged. Jill, oddly, began a kind of skipping, dancing walk. Sky watched for a moment, remaining still, then moved to catch up to her before she got too far ahead. Before them, the landscape breathed its last. Structures that might once have been buildings, or rather, representations of philosophies made solid, stood tilting towards collapse, their surfaces rippling like heat rising from summer stone. Here and there, arches dissolved mid-curve. Towers flickered between existence and memory, their edges softening into mist. The air itself hummed with the sound of things forgotten how to be. Above it all, the void. Patient, ever-present, pulling everything into itself. Sky spoke in his characteristic manner, a bespoke cadence, with a light trace of sarcasm in his voice, though what he said was not sarcastic. So these are the archetypical forms that we came to witness in collapse, he said, and Jill looked to him in serene monotone, and said, yes. The controller came over their communication systems. That is indeed correct. These ideas are still held by some, and you won't be able to dislodge all stuck points. But make sure that drain in the sky doesn't clog, and make sure most of the ruined ideas enter it. We don't need people fixated. It's time for them to move on. The void hung in the sky like an open grave, but a living grave, ready to consume the dead. A black circle rimmed with the frayed light of 1,000 dying ideas. Around its edges, energy curled and twisted, caught in the ideological pool of that black hole. Some remnants spiraled inward slowly, as if reluctant. Others simply ceased, blinking out, consumed. The void of lost ideas. The great consuming darkness where dreams went when they could no longer hold their shape. The dissolving world. There's still some cohesion left, Aunt Jill observed, her voice carrying the strange calm of one who speaks of weather, or of traffic, or of other ordinary things. She gestured towards a cluster of structures ahead, towers that leaned at angles impossible for any architect, arches that led to nothing, buildings that seemed to argue with themselves, their very forms caught mid-dispute. A city designed by philosophers in the middle of a war of ideas. Not enough to hold, though, she continued. It's already splintering. Sky tilted his head upward, watching as a hill fort in the distant grey crumbled. It had been something once, some symbol of a forgotten ideal. Perhaps some dream of permanence or defiance. Now it fell to pieces like ash, caught in an unfelt wind. The golden dust rising, spiraling, joining the endless drift towards the void. Waves of colour moved through the air. A rainbow of crimsons and blues, but intermixed now with grey. The grey eventually prevailing as the colour lost its vibrance, as it was fated to. It was substance dislodged from its vitality, always fading until its final collapse. It was a world bleeding out, desaturated, the colour draining from those dreams as they failed to find coherence, failed to find the strength to remain alive. It's more like dissolving, Sky said softly, like ice becoming waves, no longer frozen, no longer holding. Like a tower made of dust, blown by winds into the open sky and scattered. A fine sight in its way. They walked forward together, their boots leaving no imprint on the shifting knot ground. The statue. Before them stood a statue, a fist raised against the grey, seemingly carved in granite. Whether the granite had always been grey or had been desaturated like everything else, They could not tell. Either way, it had the look of defiance, a symbol of defiance, defying its own fate. It was crumbling to dust, slowly at first, then faster. And Jill regarded it, this symbol of rebellion and defiance, that she would never truly embrace herself, and something that might have been sorrow passed across her face. Or perhaps, what was her closest approximation to sorrow? Or it may have been recognition, a distant echo from her own past that led itself to sorrow and of brothers lost. A symbol of defiance, she said in serene monotone, defiant of its own fate. How oddly appropriate. She reached into her pocket for her wand, a device of metal, hollow at the tip like a tube, with a handle below and a few controls and a button that served as a trigger. Sky stayed her hand. No need. We can't expect everything to dissolve anyway, and symbols often last longer than the things they represent. This one is dissolving on its own. Let it go in its own time. Let's conserve our energy for the real blockages. And Jill paused, then lowered her wand, replacing it in her pocket. They moved on, leaving the fading fist to its slow surrender. Sky offered her a slight smile, and Jill acknowledged it. Her face remained otherwise unchanged, and they both walked on, continuing that examination of this dissolving place. The bridge and the birds. Ahead, a bridge spanning nothing, a structure that had once connected ideas now too far apart to bridge. It began to ripple like a wave, its arches shimmering into an aurora that flowed in a fluid manner, flashing indignantly, as if in protest, before silently dissipating into the grey atmosphere of this realm. In the sky above, odd shapes moved, birds, perhaps, or the memory of birds, symbols that had once been birds before they became something else, distorted, warping, becoming less distinct, losing their edges, becoming energy patterns, becoming shapeless displays of energy, before being pulled inexorably towards the black void. The agents paused, watching the process with the detached professionalism of those who had seen this before. "Do you see that?" Sky asked, gesturing towards the space where the bridge had been. Some of the patterns remain, even as the structure fails. They refuse to dissolve completely. Some last longer than others, as if some parts of them still believes. Some parts of everything believes, and Jill replied. That's what makes dissolution so slow. That's what makes our work necessary. They continued their melancholic tour of a dying realm. The flower. And Jill stopped suddenly. Her boots sank slightly into the shifting ground that was not quite ground. "Look," she said, her voice still serene, still carrying that strange calm. Ahead, a small patch of color persisted. A single flower, its petals a vibrant crimson, defiant in the bleached landscape around it. It should have faded by now. Everything else had. Yet it clung, flickering like lightning on a distant cloud, holding on, but not for long. Sky bent down, studying it. How strange. This one should have faded by now. "It's holding on," Angel said, her fingers hovering above the flower without touching it. But not for very much longer. They watched as the crimson began to flicker, the petals losing their edges, dissolving into a fine mist that drifted upward toward the void. A last breath, a final ascent. Sky stood, offering his hand, and Jill took it and rose to her feet. Ideas don't die, he said quietly. They just change shape. And some shapes are harder to let go of than others, Angel replied, glancing once more at the empty space where the flower had been. The shadowy figures. The agents walked on through the fading landscape, their footsteps leaving no trace upon the shifting ground. Around them, the air thrummed with a whisper of disintegrating symbols, half-formed creatures of light and shadow, darting between the ruins of forgotten ideals like birds in some forgotten, decayed oil painting. But it was the figures that drew their attention now. They emerged from the grey like shadows given weight. Humanoid, but not quite human. Their forms indistinct, blurring at the edges as if even they were not certain of their own existence. Some groaned the sound of old grief, of ideas that had been beloved once and now found themselves unwanted. Some wandered aimlessly, their movements carrying the purposelessness of dreams that had lost their meaning. Some struggled to survive, clawing at the ground that wasn't quite ground, trying to find something, trying to hold on. These were the remnants of ideologies themselves, the ghosts of movements, the husks of causes that had once burned bright in the hearts of millions. They had been figures of conviction once, believers, dreamers, fighters. Now they were only shadows, their edges eroding, their voices growing thin. In the distant corners, some symbols remained relatively intact. A red flag, although its color had faded into a pale rust. A golden star reduced to a dull gleam. Protest signs now illegible, their letters reduced to random markings. An upside-down figure on a banner tied with a rope, its meaning lost, its purpose forgotten. But here, in the center, the figures clustered together, drawn to one another as if proximity might preserve what isolation could not. They huddled in groups, these shadow people, holding fast to one another as if the weight of shared despair might anchor them to existence. They did not speak, if they had ever known how, but their moans filled the air, a chorus of lost, of resistance, of the desperate clinging of ideas that could not accept their own obsolescence. Some simply languished, their forms growing thinner, their outlines less defined, dissolving into the grey, even as they tried to remain. Others wandered, their paths circular, purposeless, their movements carrying no more meaning than the drift of dust. But some, these were the ones that mattered, some struggled, they fought. They reached towards the agents as Sky and Angel approached, their hands grasping, their mouths opening in silent screams that carried no sound but somehow still conveyed pleading. The blockage. Sky turned to Angel, his expression flattened. Now this is a blockage we need to handle. The figures had gathered into a tight cluster, pressing against one another, their shadows merging into something almost solid. They were resisting the pool of the void, the dissolution, the forgetting. They clung to one another with the desperation of ideas that could not accept their own end. Angel and Sky removed their wands in unison. The metal caught what little light remained, glinting with a cold, silvery gleam. They took aim, and they discharged. Beams of electromagnetic energy struck the cluster of shadowy figures. The figures began to waver and pull apart. Some dissolved immediately, their forms transitioning into nebulous energy and drifting away, rising towards the void. But others resisted and fought, holding their shapes through sheer determination, through the unyielding belief in them by the minds that had given them shape and form, minds unwilling to let go of an ideal that could no longer be. The agents maintained the electromagnetic beams. The goal was simply to disperse them. The struggle continued. The shadows writhed. The beams held. Eventually, some figures merged with others or drifted away. But in the end, they began to dissolved into the grey like ink in water, their silhouettes stretching, warping, shattering into shards of fading light. Most simply ceased, but a few fled. Angel lowered her wand with a soft motion. "They won't last long," she said, watching the last stragglers vanish. "They never do." Sky pocketed his wand. "No," he agreed, his black eyes reflecting the swirling void above. "But they'll fight until they can't. That is the nature of belief." Angel then spoke. They ran, shadows being kept alive and moving by the minds that shaped them. "Why do humans persist so in what has already ended?" Sky looked at her and replied, "It is the nature of man to hold on to things important to him, and to not want to let go of things from the past, especially if he was defined by them." Angel looked out at the decayed landscape, and in the same serene monotone spoke. "It seems tragic, though. Adhering to what is past, for even holding to these views does not truly revive them. They can only have a dreary half-life, a shadowy existence. If not let go of, the vitality has moved on to a new zeitgeist, a new era. It is a disservice to those ideals to not let them pass, and to reform and renew. Holding them here does nothing but prevent that, and does not truly stop the new. It only blocks it, forces it into a suppressed but still potent state. It makes matters worse." Sky looked at Angel and replied, "The angels in heaven cling to their decisions too, never wavering." Angel replied, "There is a difference. Angels cannot waver, and angels are eternal, seeing all time at once. For an angel, it is not about a present, for all time is now, and choice is being, and will is absolute. Men have wills that change, and men are beings who experience the passage and changes of time." Sky smiled faintly. "That is a difference. But the echoes of that are in man, too. Man can be as defined by his ideals and beliefs as any angel. It is sometimes what makes a person feel that their existence has meaning or direction." Angel responded, "It is still a waste." Sky did not protest. The two continued their tour into the dying realm of shadows, to do the work they had come to do. The dying world. They pressed by many objects, and sometimes objects that behaved as creatures, their forms streaming behind them like tattered flags, dissolving even as they moved, their edges fraying, their substance thinning, until they disappeared into the ether of an atmosphere and drifted towards the void, which remained ever present. They passed faded remnants of desires, protest signs no longer legible, spikes and spears collapsing into fragments, and shadowy figures who collapsed into waves of amorphous energy, compelled to hold form as much as possible, reflecting the obsessions of the minds that forced them to retain their shape. The ever-shifting skyline had become full of cloud-like energy being pulled towards the void. The sky above swirled with the remnants of 1,000 failed arguments, their essence bleeding into one another until they became indistinct streaks of dull energy. Here and there, a flash of crimson or azure flickered like a dying ember before being extinguished by the relentless pull of the void. The ground beneath their feet seemed to breathe, rising and falling in slow waves, as though the very fabric of this realm was sighing its last. To their left, a cluster of twisted spires leaned precariously, their surfaces etched with withering marks of damage as if by wind, walls that glowed faintly before fading into nothingness. One tower, taller than the rest, collapsed inward with a soundless implosion, its structure dissolving to a fine powder that hung suspended for a moment before joining the upward drift, transforming into an aura-like electromagnetic field. Shadows lengthened and shortened without source, stretching across the terrain like hands reaching for something just out of reach. It was a world of endings, a world once vibrant with life, shaping the direction of the material world, and yet now collapsing and unmoored from impact, superseded by a new era. And at the center of it all, the void, the patient, ever-present void, a great dark hole that consumed every idea whose time had passed. The agents walked on, their black suits dark against the fading light, and their red cravat ties, the only color left in a world becoming only gray. At the faded river dissolve, they passed by what looked like a river, though something like a river from an old, faded film, where all was shot in grey tones, and where the film was grainy. It was dissolving, as was the rest, but slowly, as if water was gradually turning to dust, as was the embankment round about it, and the degraded forms of trees and bushes broke away into tiny fragments of that same dust, and were gradually swept away by the same ill wind that pulled all ever upward toward the void. And Jill paused for a moment to look at the river, and when he noticed, Sky stopped beside her. "It seems like the flow of ideas run toward the sky," said Sky. And Jill said nothing, but looked for an extended moment. The two, with more substance than the fading shadows round about them, shared a moment simply to look at this river before it too dissolved into the realm where thoughts go to rest and reform. After a moment, Jill snapped around, turning sharply and silently, and began to walk. Sky last name followed suit, though less precisely. He simply turned and followed once he saw her do so, though briefly he stopped, turned back, and looked at the river one last time, but only for a moment, and he did not allow Jill to get too far ahead. Not that she would leave him too far behind. The two walked on, seeing mountains in the distance, also beginning to turn into a haze of dust and flit away. They see more shadow figures that look as though they were roughly humanoid, groaning and making unintelligible sounds, fading away, some also turning to dust. Two of them seem to be fighting each other. They must embody the idea of some sort of conflict. Either that, or they were two different ideas, or different interpretations people fought over, said Sky, and Jill spoke in her usual monotone. They are too degraded to tell. The sky now dimmed, itself fading along with the rest of the world. Sky and Jill continued their melancholic tour through the wasteland of old dreams and faded aspirations, and yesterday's constructed new futures now relegated to be memories of a past's imaginings that can now never be. The two pass a monument of a great man, his right arm extended, elbow bent, palm flat as if speaking and gesturing, his left arm extended slightly back as if in a pose to summon action, the sort of pose leaders take in speeches to invigorate the masses. But there was no real face, only a sort of vague shape of one. One could still trace the contours, but no features were distinct. Nothing was truly formed. This seems to be a stubborn sort of thought. I wonder what it is. Whatever it is, it seems less dissolute than most other things here, said Skye. And Jill replied, It is, however, within the normal patterns we are to expect. The two continued to walk. The continuing melancholic tour. The two time agents walked on, taking note of the fading forms, some seeming to melt, others seem as if the material they are composed of drifts off to dust, or whirls or spirals off of them. Others still seem only to fade. They walked down a field, with grey-toned grass slowly breaking apart and drifting up to the sky, carried by the same wind that seems to take all from this realm, past hills that were fading from sight, partially transparent, and as if an old oil painting left exposed to the sun now fades, with its details obscured by the bleaching power of the sun. They walk on, finding the river earlier was again before them. It apparently wound around, and in that river they saw the opening of a bay, in a way that seemed rather unlikely, and in that bay ships, wooden ships with sails, and more modern ships, metal warships, but all deformed, distorted, and deteriorating. They walked as birds seemed to fly into the air, calling in broken cawing or garbled song, as the edges of them dissolved into the air, so that it was hard to determine where the bird ended and the sky began. They saw what may have once been young lovers on a bench, in a pantomime, lifeless embrace, but whose faces had no features and whose motions seemed rigid and almost mechanical, as their bodies became less and less distinct. Tents and booths or markets, with no merchants or no goods, empty of life, and more shadow figures, some moving on, fighting, it seemed, to endure. The two time agents saw in the distance what looked like a city, or perhaps a town, or what looked like an outdoor film set where the facades were built, but not the city. Only the buildings did have all sides. They just seemed hollow. They entered the city. In the city they saw shadowy figures going about seemingly mundane tasks, whilst others railed against the fading of their world and their own dissolution, and passed what seemed perhaps a political rally, with garbled but impassioned sounding speeches given to creatures that seemed both energetic and motivated, and yet as if it was empty and lifeless at the same time. For they were just going through the motions, indistinct posters with very abstract images, that perhaps once were not so abstract, but now are decayed, lining the walls of the city streets or the tents like openings. They walked on, seeing shops with customers, but no keepers, or stores with no goods, or goods that could not be told apart from others, and roads that led into a mist or fog, not hidden by it, but dissolving into it and now leading nowhere. The wands and the shades. The two agents walked down what looked like a street, with half-dissolved buildings and decayed structures that gave the appearance of a city, but one that blended this urban landscape with similarly decayed scenes from nature, bushes, grass, trees, even a rock face, blended unevenly in the background, melting away into a sad oblivion. Shadowy figures moved around them, some humanoid, some only vaguely so, others like animals, some like misshapen creatures not quite resembling any real animal but monstrous in form, fading black or grey masses, moaning, groaning onward until they fell, collapsed, and scattered to dust that flew upward in the wind, or distorted and flickered like a failing electrical image and sputtered out. In the distance, an arcing aurora formed. Unlike the rest of this world, it seemed to glow in color, not fade into gray. Sky looked up at the sky and said, "It is beautiful, is it not?" And Jill looked at Sky and said, "It is a beauty in desolation, ready to consume the remnant of what it was. It is an effort to find life and meaning in the end." Sky smiled slightly, replying, "Perhaps so, but it is beautiful all the same." And Jill said, "Its beauty is marred by its refusal to admit the flaws it once had. It is an offer to romanticize an ideology and not fully release it." Sky responded, "Sometimes we need to romanticize our ideals, but at least it is not an effort to cling to its application past its time. It is simply a quiet longing for it, an adherence to its principles, a way to preserve it whilst not holding back the tide of thought, a way to keep it relevant in a new order. And who knows, perhaps instead of hindering, or even remaining merely in the background, this is a remnant of the old that will inform the new and help it establish itself, helping build the new from the old, redirecting it to a higher end. After all, the new always flows from the old, and the old lives on in the new." And Jill looked sharply ahead. Unfortunately, that cannot be said of them. In the distance, a group of shadowy figures had gathered, stubbornly refusing to let go, adhering fiercely to what they were, not dissolving, but not remaining as they had been, deforming, turning in on themselves. Sky said, "Well, not everything makes it easy. I suppose we have to disperse those if we can." And Jill looked at him and asked, "I do not understand this aspect of the human psyche. The aurora is understandable as a healthy retention of older ideas, and these shadows are an unhealthy retention. But are they not both a retention of old ideas? I understand that the aurora is not a blockage, and will even help support the new ideas when they come. And I know that the shadows are corrupted and distorted, and a hindrance. But I do not know what causes this distinction in human thought. What makes one different from another?" Sky replied, "You will find this to be true of humanity, that ideas flow from older ideas, and the new is a reply to the old. We can never truly abandon the old. The new must be formed of the old. We need to keep the same aspect of the old to make any sense of the new. The old can flow evenly into the new, mixing and washing away slowly, retaining a remnant as an underflow whilst the rest is transformed. This is how the human mind works. But sometimes we don't want that change. We try to isolate or protect our ideas, try too hard to hold on to beliefs about the world that no longer align with the way the world is, or perhaps have been proven wrong by the reality we have discovered. And when that happens, sometimes we hold on to those ideas anyway. They are cut off from their source of life, and are kept alive mainly as a sort of mental cancer, feeding off of itself and the mental environment around it, or else off of other ideas. They can't retain their old form even then. This is what causes them to warp and distort like this. They no longer inform the present. They try to force the present to conform to them. Sky looked off into the distance. Angel then spoke. It seems so odd, holding to a mistaken idea or a past reality, even though it harms you, since the circumstances make it impossible for those ideas to truly endure. They are cut off from life and turn into a sort of mental cancer, consuming itself and other aspects of thought, as you say, poisoning the mind and causing decay. Why would people do this? It seems self-defeating. Sky replied, Humanity is complex that way. Creatures who look to the future by looking at the past, and who build the world in their minds, and this tells them who they are and how things are. It's hard to give up a world, even if only part of it. It's a refusal to let it flow normally, an attempt to retain a shape that cannot endure the reality of the situation. That is what creates these malformed tragedies. But it's still based on the same principle. We can't really let go of our past ideas. We either let them transform whilst retaining some aspect of them, or we cling to them and try to force them to remain when they cannot survive in the new reality, warping our minds. The shadowy figures crept closer. Angel and Sky Last Name pulled out their wands, which discharged an electromagnetic pulse. Some of the figures dissipated, others fled. Sky said, That's why we are here. We are here to help people let go of these ideas, but we can't catch them all, and even if we could, some thought constructs are given life by the will so strongly that they simply cannot be dissolved. Angel looked once more at him and said, You said these thought constructs are cut off from the source of life. Sky smiled, saying, So I did. While it is sometimes hard to cover in words what we see, but what I mean is this. The source of life of all that we see here in this realm of thought is given life by human will. None of it is truly alive. Its dreams given shape to abstract ideals, but humanity itself is only the immediate source. Humanity is not the real source of life. You of all people should know that, my dear Angel. Angel responded, You are correct. But the way you phrased it is confusing. Sky, not missing a beat, replied, Reality is often confusing, but never contradictory. They then heard a rumble in the sky. Both looked up. The controller's voice came over the communications lines. Well, this dream is about to end. The world is collapsing. You two had best get back to the sphere. Angel and Sky Last Name replaced their wands in their pockets. Indeed, said Angel. The two-time agents began to walk through an increasingly distorted and bizarre landscape. Twisted buildings, warped mountains, a ground that was not ground, increasingly seeming as if it were made of dust blowing away beneath their feet. An ill wind blew, yet it was neither hot nor cold. They walked past black fire that gave no heat, distorting and crackling, shadowy figures collapsing round about them, though some held together. But increasingly, all of it became invisible, as a thick fog-like air filled the world, obscuring the sights they had been seeing. The fog-like air was not simply thick. It was growing thicker, and the world seemed beginning smaller, collapsing around them. The controller came back on. The wave function is collapsing before the reset. It is deeply advisable that you two levies get back to the sphere. It'd be a shame to become part of the reshaped landscape now, wouldn't it? The two did not bother with a response. They simply quickened their pace. Return to the sphere. In the distance, the sphere came into view. The sky, now mainly grey, flashed with two different streams of multicolored patterns. One like a gentle, sloping stream, evenly streaking the sky. the other a chaotic wave of crackling energy, like a cross between lightning and a tidal wave. And Jill spoke, as if in exposition. The old and the new are colliding. Sky Last Name replied, and we don't want to be part of that collision, so let's away, shall we? The two made their way to the sphere. The door opened, a ramp lowered, and Sky said, after you, gently bowing and raising a hand in gesture, allowing Jill to enter first. But Sky paused. He turned back and looked one final time at the landscape, now a collapsing, dense void of grey, with shadows in the distance, hard to see, blurred behind both the fog-like air and the distorted, dissolving nature of what they were. Then Sky turned, entered the sphere, and the ramp pulled up, and the door closed. Departure. The interior of the sphere was large enough for them to stand and move freely, and it had 3 decks. The interior was softly lit, with what seemed to be wooden paneling and crafted stone. The two made their way to the control room, which was spacious and circular, with a control console of metal and stone with wooden paneling, decked with brass, bronze, and silver rails. The control panel was composed of different crystals and 3 crystal balls, one in front of each chair, and a larger crystal ball in the center, with 2 smaller ones off to the side. There were also levers and cranks in differing places. It looked like a blend of old Victorian science fiction and magical fantasy, with something of a church chapel or sacred temple about it. Sky Last Name spoke. Controller, we are arrived. Let us depart. The controller replied, you will be out of there and on your way home in a few seconds. Sky and Jill sat in their chairs as the sphere lifted and left. The end.